Okay, so let's get today's event started. Welcome everyone to this first event in the webinar series on the soil mission and living lab concepts and methodologies. Today's event is organized and hosted by the Nishuns Project. And we have a fantastic program for you today. In this webinar, you will learn about several concepts and methodologies, but we will spend a little bit of time doing some context setting and doing an overview of the EU mission, a soil deal for Europe. We will cover the benefits of soil health, living labs, and lighthouses. We'll also cover what are soil health living labs and lighthouses and address some of the questions that are remaining around these topics. We will talk about how to set up a living lab, so the steps, the different roles in living labs and actors, speaking to living labs pitfalls and challenges. And then we'll also spend a little bit of time talking about the services offered by Nishuns to support applicants and more. We will be also saving lots of time for questions, and we'll get to that in a moment. So yes, some housekeeping items before we get started. You can submit all of your questions through the Q&A box, please. So not the chat box, but the Q&A box, so that we can make sure that in addition to comments and conversation, we can also keep track of your good questions that are coming through. And thank you to those who have submitted questions in advance through the registration form. We will address those later on in the webinar as well. We might be asking some poll questions through the events. We'll see how much time we have, but be ready to perhaps answer some poll questions from us towards the end. We will be using Slido if that's the case, and we'll be providing more information about this later. If you have given your consent during registration to receive updates from Nishuns and or to receive information from other initiatives related to the EU soil mission, you always have the right to withdraw your consent, of course, and you can do so by emailing info@nishuns with 2 zeros .eu. And finally, this event is recorded and the recording will be shared publicly. We will also be sharing the slides. So for everyone asking, we'll be making sure to share those materials with you after today's event. And with that, I will introduce our speakers for today, including myself. My name is Isabelle Couture. I'm a senior project manager with the European Network of Living Labs. And just very briefly, for those of you who might not yet be familiar with the work of the European Network of Living Labs, ENoLL is the European network of certified living labs that has been funded in 2006 under the EU presidency of Finland. And despite its name of European Network, ENoLL has grown from a Europe focus to an international growing community with more than 160 active members across 5 continents and 35 countries. And since 2006, ENoLL facilitates knowledge exchange, joint action, and project partnership among its members. The goal of ENoLL is to promote the living lab concept, influence policies, enhance living labs, and enable their implementation at a global level. And in line with this, we offer different services. Among these, we have certification and labeling. So ENoLL is the sole institutional body entitled to assess the maturity of living labs. We also offer a robust capacity building program around living lab creation and increasing expertise on living lab methodologies and tools. And we also have several working groups involved in different areas of key interest, including agriculture, agri-food, and rural issues. So today I am joined by my colleague Vladislava, and I will turn it over to Vladislava to introduce herself. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you very much. So I'm Vladislava Grbovic from BioSense Institute from Novi Sad, Serbia. So I will go a little bit about our institute, just short. BioSense is a research and development institute for IT in biosystems and also a University of Novi Sad member. BioSense is a public institute and it has like more than 140 permanent staff and 60 part-time staff, and it's a very dynamic and multidisciplinary international organization. So we have engineers, material scientists, biologists, agronomists, and so on. And also BioSense is a pioneer in digital transformation of agriculture in Serbia, founded in 2015, exploring scientific and technologies frontiers regarding applications of IT in agriculture. So we strive to deliver state-of-the-art digital solutions and farming sector in Serbia, and of course to the rest of the world, in that order, to ensure higher yield and smaller investments. So BioSense also participates in more than over 100 national and more than 50 Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe projects. So we also have numerous national and international rewards. So that would be like a short introduce to BioSense Institute, and I will now give Isabel the floor again to start.
Great, thanks so much, Vladislava. And before we get started, just a very quick disclaimer that this webinar is licensed, as is shown on this slide here. Okay, so with that, so for those of you who have attended the national engagement events hosted by Nashoons, you will already be familiar with the following content. But since many of you are newcomers in a way, about 396, I think, new registrants to this webinar were new to the Nashoons and had not attended previous events, we wanted to take some time to briefly introduce the EU mission, a soil deal for Europe, so that we can really provide some context for today's event. So soil works really hard for us. Healthy soils not only give us fuel, fiber, and food, but they also sustain Earth and humanity. They provide essential ecosystem services like clean water, habitats for biodiversity, and of course, they give us major carbon reservoirs that help slow climate change and make us more resilient to extreme climatic events. So wherever we live in this world, we are all connected by soil. Yet, healthy soils are often taken for granted. And soil health is threatened globally because of a range of human activities, such as competition for land, production, urbanization, and of course, anthropogenic climate change. And in Europe alone, about 2/3 of the soils are considered unhealthy. And the cost associated with soil degradation in the EU exceeds 50 billion euros per year. So soil is a fragile, non-renewable resource that really needs to be carefully managed and kept safe for future generations. So recognizing the importance of healthy soils and the pressure that soil functions are under, the EU made soils the focus of one of its 5 missions, which are new ways to bring concrete solutions to great challenges. The soil mission was created to lead the transition towards healthy soils by 2030, and it's at the heart of the EU Green Deal, which is a package of policy initiatives to overcome threats by climate change and environmental degradation. The soil mission includes 8 specific soil health objectives, and you might be familiar with these already, but we'll go through them just very quickly. So we have reducing desertification, conserving and increasing soil organic carbon stocks, stopping soil sealing and increasing reuse of urban soils, reducing soil pollution and enhancing restoration, preventing erosion, improving soil structure to enhance soil biodiversity, reducing the EU global footprint on soils, and improving soil literacy in society. So in this next section now of the presentation, we briefly cover why using Living Labs and Lighthouses can help solve the complex problems or challenges as highlighted in the soil mission. So Living Labs are more and more recognized as an important tool to tackle societal problems. Living Labs and the Living Lab methodology provide many benefits, which we'll run through here. So Living Labs provide a real-life environment for testing and validating innovations, especially when addressing wicked problems. So those problems that are complex, dynamic, and often involve multiple stakeholders. They provide a powerful tool for co-creating solutions solutions involving end users in the innovation process, ensuring solutions are very much tailored to their needs. They enable collaboration between different stakeholders, including researchers, industry partners, communities, farmers, and we'll return later to the concept of this quadruple helix, which is mentioned here. They facilitate rapid iteration and prototyping of solutions, leading to faster innovation cycles. They provide valuable insights into the adoption of sustainability of innovations in the long run, which is important to consider. And they help bridge the gap between research and market uptake, so leading to more impactful innovations. And finally, transforming clients into developers. Living Labs support the creation of products and services that are more suitable for the market. So it de-risks innovation. And with that, here you go. So when speaking of engaging in Living Lab co-creation and cooperating in teams that involve multiple stakeholders, you might have encountered some of these challenges. For example, lack of trust between stakeholders, stakeholders having different languages or different approach, different goals. So solution for practice versus publishable results, for example, having practical solutions from one farm that are not widespread, or practical solutions that tend not to be evaluated, or lots of motivated farmers that are maybe not, that their voices are not being heard, or it's still difficult for them to get heard, and other challenges. So in this way, Living Labs can help you address these challenges and make you and the stakeholders become inspired, learn to think outside of the box, better understand each other, accept different, excuse me, perspectives from different stakeholders, aim for the same goals, work together instead of side by side. So avoiding silos and eliminating them as much as possible, and quickly finding solutions that have been thoroughly evaluated from different perspectives, from different stakeholders, and that can be scaled then more easily. So lots to gain from, of course, the Living Labs method and methodologies. So going back to the soil mission, seeing now the many benefits that Living Labs bring, it is then clear why the Living Labs are at the core of the EU soil mission. And in this slide here, you can see how the Living Labs and Lighthouses benefit from and contribute to all the operational objectives of the mission. So for example, Living Labs and Lighthouses add to the research and innovation program. They add the knowledge, innovation, and research questions from practitioners responding to the local needs that are identified in Living Labs. Living Labs are platforms to test and adapt scientific knowledge, frameworks, and methods in real-life settings. They use a soil health monitoring framework to assess the impact of innovations and of their practices on soil health and ecosystems. And of course, they contribute to the testing and validation of monitoring techniques and approaches. Finally, Living Labs and Lighthouses are ideal places for citizen engagement and for activities and practices to improve awareness and knowledge of soils. Now that we better understand the benefits and what is to gain from using Living Labs and Lighthouses, let's dive a little bit deeper into what exactly are soil health, Living Labs, and Lighthouses. So here, Soil Health Living Labs are, of course, collaborative initiatives to co-create knowledge and innovation. The EU Soil Mission Implementation Plan defines Soil Health Living Labs as user-centered, place-based, and transdisciplinary research and innovation ecosystems, which involve land managers, scientists, and other relevant partners in systemic research and co-design, testing, monitoring, and evaluation of solutions in real-life setting to improve their effectiveness for soil health and accelerate adoption. And we'll break this down into smaller bits in a moment. But meanwhile, lighthouses are defined as places for demonstration of solutions, training, and communications that are exemplary, in their performance in terms of soil health improvement. So these are really local sites. So one farm, one forest exploitation, one industrial site, one urban city green area, depending on the land uses that you're focusing on, for example, and other cases. So we will go, yes, into the criteria of the Living Labs and Lighthouses in more detail so that we can really break it down for you. But before we go into that, we thought it was important to also speak to what a Living Lab is not, so that we can really clarify the concept for everyone. So Living Labs are not a test bed or a pre-living lab setting, enabling rigorous, transparent, and replicable testing of scientific theories, computational tools, and new technologies in a controlled environment. So it's not in real life. So in this way, it is not a test bed which also uses users that are often represented mainly by researchers. And as you will see, Living Labs really need to include all types of stakeholders. Living Labs are also not a fab lab or a fabrication laboratory, which is a small scale workshop offering digital fabrication. A fab lab is typically equipped with a range of flexible computer control tools that cover different length scales or various materials for developing technologies, enable products to mass production. So it's not solely focused on fabrication. And then finally, Living Labs are not home labs, which is a concept that originated at MIT and which focused on testing and adapting new technologies based on their fit within the daily home environment only. So I hope it's helpful to also define what Living Labs are not, as it can be often confused. Okay, so as mentioned, Soil Health Living Labs are place-based and are collaborations between multiple partners that operate at regional and sub-regional levels, and they coordinate experiments on several sites within a regional or sub-regional area or working landscape. So as you can see here on the image on the left, lighthouses can be one of the many experimentation sites. So you see that this circle is the Living Lab, and you have the multiple partners, and then you have experimentation sites that are shown as the little F. And the Living Labs can be one of them within the Living Lab, and they are, again, the valuable high-performance lighthouses, or they can actually be positioned outside of the Living Lab, as shown here. And this information is all recapped for you with the scale, activities, and performance in soil health improvement to demonstrate for the Living Lab experimentation sites, and the lighthouses as well. So going again from the Living Lab down to the experimentation sites and the lighthouses. And if we were to zoom out now and we were to look at your project proposals, for example, so you may remember that project applications to the EU Soil Mission open call topics on Living Labs require 4 to 5 or more Living Labs to be part of your project. So in this image, you can then see the wide number of stakeholders that will come together in your project. So speaking to the different, the different circles, the different Living Labs, but then also including the different partners within the Living Labs and the experimentation sites and the lighthouses. So it is quite impressive to see the amount and impact that these projects will have in terms of involving multiple stakeholders through the Living Labs. And it is crucial to understand that Living Labs operate on 3 separate but interlinked layers. So these should all be considered when you have a Living Lab. So of course, the Living Lab at the macro level is a constellation consisting of organized stakeholders. And here we, in terms of research paradigm, we have the open innovation, the knowledge transfers between organizations. And this is referred to the PPP, which is the people, private, public partnership, which we'll talk about more in detail. But at the meso level, then we have the Living Lab Innovation Project, using Living Lab methodologies. And often when some might be speaking of Living Labs, they might be speaking most of the meso level, but we're really wanting to include all levels. So the macro with the constellation, the meso speaking of the projects, and again, using the open and user innovation, real life experimentation, active user involvement, multi-method and multi-stakeholder engagement. And this is again at the project level. And then finally, the macro level would represent the activities of the Living Lab. So the individual Living Lab research steps and activities linked to the stakeholders, assets, and capabilities, which again include the user innovation, so user involvement and contribution for innovation. So all different levels are very much interlinked and important to represent within your Living Lab. And a Living Lab focuses again on a well-structured organization on the macro level, with Living Lab projects at the meso level, consisting of co-created activities on the micro level. Great. So we can count 6 essential building blocks of Living Labs. The first being co-creation, of course. So in a Living Lab, values are bottom-up co-created, not only for, but also by all relevant stakeholders, ensuring a higher adoption at the end. Real life setting, which I've mentioned a couple of times already, when a Living Lab operates in the real life setting of the end users and fusing innovations into their real life instead of moving the user to test sites to explore the innovations. We have the multi-method approach where each Living Lab activity is problem-driven. Therefore, the methodological approach towards every individual activity will be selected based on the expected outcomes of the activity and the stakeholders who need to be involved. Orchestration, where the Living Lab operates as the orchestrator within the ecosystem to connect and partner with relevant stakeholders. We have multi-stakeholder participation, which takes a holistic view on society involving stakeholders from the quadruple helix model, including government, academia, private sector, and citizens. And we'll get to this in just the next slide in a moment in more detail. And active user involvement. A Living Lab involves relevant stakeholders actively in all relevant activities, ensuring their feedback is captured and implemented throughout the whole life cycle of the innovation. And here, as promised, the quadruple helix. So speaking of multi-stakeholder participation and active user involvement, an essential characteristic of the Living Lab methodology is the user-centric approach, which involves all relevant actors and end users. So of course, the specific actors in your Living Labs will change depending on the focus, objectives, and context of your particular Living Lab, but all the actors can be classified according to the quadruple helix model shown here in this slide, which is really an extension of the typical public-private partnership. So again, here we're talking of the public-private people partnership. And the quadruple helix model involves representatives from all sectors of society. For example, academia can be universities or research and development centers. The public sector can be government and regional development agencies and policymakers, as well as public sector in general. Industry can consist of businesses of all size and business clusters and association. And finally, the fourth actor of the quadruple helix is the citizens, civil society, and users, including all end users such as farmers, land managers, consumers, and their associations. So again, these together form the PPP, the public-private people partnership that enables real co-creation and impact. And following the soil mission, Nishuns consider 4 main types of soil health living labs. The first being agricultural living labs, which may focus inclusive to organic and mineral soils, specific farming, systems approaches, agroecology, and they can include players such as farmers and land users, agricultural advisors, agribusiness companies, and these are just some examples. The second land use is the urban land use. So urban living labs will focus, for example, on multi-use soils, soil threats, sustainable urban planning, and other areas, and may involve citizens, public administrations, inhabitants, civil groups, and others. The third being forestry living labs, which of course will focus on forest-related measures, can focus on land fragmentation, abandonment, landscape planning, and will involve, for example, landowners, forest managers, forest companies, forest owner associations. And the last but not least, industrial living labs or post-industrial living labs will focus on multi-use soils, soil restoration, soil threats, soil sealing, and pollution. And some of the players that can be involved are SMEs, large industries, associations, and consumers. And the mission implementation plan defines, of course, a set of criteria for the selection and setup of living labs in the context of the soil mission. So those of you who will have read carefully the soil mission implementation plan, you will be familiar with this, but we trust it was important to cover these in more detail. You might have seen also the shorter list that we have presented in the national engagement event, but here we'll go into much more detail into this. So the next few slides will cover the longer list of criteria found in the soil mission implementation plan annex, and the criteria are classified across 4 main areas for living labs. So those are the aims, activities, participants, and context. So if we start with the aims, we have, of course, it refers to the innovation, co-creation, formal learning. So already you're seeing the same concept that we just spoke through come up again. We have the contribution to societal challenges, sustainability and resilience, improving soil health and related ecosystem services, to achieve the soil mission objectives in a holistic manner and in the specific context of the region where you operate. And in terms of activities, many things to keep in mind. So the Living Lab activities are required to include outreach and facilitation of engagement of the land users, co-design, co-development, co-creation of innovations, focus on improving soil health and ecosystem services in major soils and land use systems in a given region area. And of course, the experimentation of innovative practices and solutions using transdisciplinary multi-actor systems approach, and again, real life settings, as we've been mentioning already. It would also include the measurement, monitoring, evaluation of impact of innovative practices, approaches on soil health and related ecosystem services at site and landscape levels, involving research and innovative measurement technologies, evaluation of socioeconomic impacts and behavioral drivers and lock-ins, contributing to networking and knowledge exchange, and finally, testing, validating, and improving the comprehensive soil and ecosystem monitoring system through co-creation. So lots of things to consider in terms of activities when building your living lab. When it comes to the participants that should include, so again, we will go back to the same concepts of the public-private people partnership. So really involving, if very much possible, the 4 groups when it comes to the science, policy, practice, and citizens. We're also looking at active engagement in co-development and experimentation of the multiplicity of users having an impact on the achievement of the societal goals, and involving the users of primary importance. And this can include soil managers and researchers, which would have the responsibility early on in the process to connect with other interests. And here you have a list of others that might be involved. Always keeping in mind, of course, that the list of users may depend on your particular context within your region. And finally, for the demonstration activities, the target audiences include soil managers, the public arena, and relevant networks, such as, for example, the EIP Agri. And Finally, we have in terms of context, which refers to the transdisciplinary and participatory approach, the multi-method approach, again, being place-based while having well-defined system boundaries of relevance to soil challenges. And as always, real-life context, so real farms, forest, or urban industrial sites seeking to go beyond current practice. The long-term setup, where here we might be referring to setting up your structure for the governance and business models as well, which will be covered in subsequent webinar, which we'll be talking about. And openness, communication, and dissemination and connection with networks, multiple dimensions, including technical, economic, and social, and the robust scientific setup for ecosystem assessment. So that was for the criteria of the Living Labs, but of course, we cannot forget about the lighthouses, which in parallel, the criteria focus, of course, on exemplary performance and potential of aspiration within soil health and related ecosystem services. But more precisely, when we look at the activities of lighthouses, we are really looking for demonstration, dissemination, and promotion to soil managers, the public, and again, the policy arena at landscape scale and beyond of land use systems that satisfy criteria for sustainable development, in particular in terms of soil health and related ecosystem services. And very much so reaching out to the policy arena, linking results of the lighthouse to environmental rules and regulations. And this is in line with the science-based policy support and governance. Okay, so now that we have a thorough understanding of the Living Labs benefits, what they are, and the criteria for Living Labs and lighthouses under the soil mission, this brings us to the next session, the section of our presentation on how do you set up a Living Lab? So when setting up a Living Lab, the main components of the constellation, as shown briefly here on this slide, need to be walked through multiple times with the core stakeholders and your internal Living Lab team to agree on the initial strategy as well as the operational and business plans. So a Living Lab environment should have good relation with and access to users willing to be involved in innovation processes. Any Living Lab should have access to multi-contextual environments, as well as high-end technology and infrastructure that can really support both the processes of user involvement, but also the technology development and test. Each Living Lab environment needs organization and methodologies suitable for its specific circumstances, so always keeping in mind your specific context. And finally, a Living Lab needs access to a diversity of expertise in terms of different partners that can contribute to the different activities. Equally important are the key principles of the approaches applied to Living Lab activities. The stakeholder engagement, as well as governance and business models, will be covered in the second webinar. So we won't be spending too much time on this here, since we'll be going into a lot more detail in the second webinar. So you won't want to miss it if you haven't registered already. And we'll give you the details for that one at the end of today's presentation. So on this slide, something else to consider when you're setting up your Living Lab is the roles of your people that are in the Living Lab on your Living Lab team. So some are shown here. So we have the Living Lab manager, which is perhaps the most apparent internal role. They are the initiator and keeper of the Living Lab strategy. They manage the Living Lab's everyday activities, and they ensure that Living Lab is maintained effectively and sustainably. The panel manager is responsible for recruiting and interacting with the panel of stakeholders, as its name indicates, and it selects the stakeholders that are to be involved in your Living Lab, and it handles the communications with them. The pilot manager is responsible for setting up, running, and scaling up technologies during pilot projects. They help facilitate implementation and test of the innovation. Could also be a human interaction specialist that perform the user-centered interaction. So they're the ones analyzing results from different human interaction methods. They're responsible for testing solutions before implementation in real life context. And finally, the last role is the project manager, which is responsible for simply managing of the management of a particular Living Lab project. So some roles to consider within your internal Living Lab team. But in addition to the internal roles within your Living Lab, there are various actors in the Living Labs, which are important to cover. So we'll go through them in a bit more here. So we have the utilizers, which are the customers of your Living Lab that utilize the Living Lab to co-create innovation. The enablers are the providers of financial resources or other types of resources in kind, for example, or facilitators to sustain the Living Lab platforms. And the providers are there to provide the infrastructure or service providers to sustain the Living Lab platform. The users are those participants in the Living Lab activity. So we're talking again about the panel or user community. And finally, of course, we have the researchers who are the knowledge generators of the Living Lab. So the ones that are doing with the users and the stakeholder co-creation are involved in these types of activities. Okay, so many, of course, methodologies are available to you when you set up your Living Lab, some of which are outlined here. I'll walk through some of them. So for example, in setting up your Living Lab, you should spend some time in thoroughly defining your vision, mission, and purpose for your Living Lab, further defining what your Living Lab is trying to achieve and how. A SWOT analysis, so some of you might be familiar with this concept, will help you identify the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to really reveal those positive forces that work together and the potential problems that need to be recognized and possibly addressed when you're setting up your Living Lab. The mapping stakeholders works to identify which stakeholders to involve in each sector of the quadruple helix. So you're really working through the different sectors and you're identifying not only, say, the type of organization, but also down to the actual person you might want to be involving in your Living Lab activities. So yes, each sector of the quadruple helix. But we also have the stakeholder journey canvas, which help you better understand what are the individual needs of each stakeholder and how to keep them engaged. So really providing them with the incentives on how to engage them in the Living Lab methodologies. You can also use the power versus interest matrix, which some of you might be familiar with already, to categorize stakeholders so that they can be effectively managed. And this simply it refers to plotting your stakeholders on the grid in relation of how much power they have versus how much interest or influence they have in respect of your Living Lab. So then you can see if they need to be involved in day-to-day activities, or if you can provide more regular updates, or to really help you prioritize which stakeholders to involve. And of course, there are many more methodologies that are at your disposition when setting up your Living Lab. And again, for the governance model and business model canvas, we'll be happy to go into more detail into these in the second webinar. Okay, so in these last few slides, I want to walk you through some of the challenges and pitfalls to keep in mind when setting up your Living Lab. So some of the challenges that might come up when you're trying to set up your Living Lab include a lack of structure. So the Living Lab might not be at first set up properly. So you might not have a governance or business model. You might not have the proper team in place or the resources needed to run your living lab. It's also important to keep in mind the balanced representation. So it might be a struggle to ensure a balanced representation of different societal groups and enabling all stakeholders to efficiently and effectively participate in a living lab. We also want to make sure that the stakeholders are motivated to participate. So again, speaking of the stakeholder journey, we want to provide them incentives in order to stay engaged over the long time of a systemic transformation lasting several years or even decades in many cases when it comes to soil health related living labs. It can be on a very long time horizon. Integrating existing economic and political networks in living labs without creating an imbalance of forces or powers can be a challenge, and it can prevent an inclusive transformation process if not approached well. Challenges can also include assessing and measuring the effects and effectiveness of multiple connected experiments on complex social technical regimes. Implementing suitable governance arrangements for a living lab can be difficult in operating on different levels of government. So looking at not a sole level of government, but really the local, regional, and national, but not necessarily within the boundaries of a specific political and administrative unit. We also want to make sure that we create a common vision, which can be difficult for a transformation on a urban, local, regional scale within the variety of different stakeholders. So definitely need to be able to create a common vision. And finally, in terms of dealing with individual interests and conflicting ideas among the stakeholders, this can be a challenge when stakeholders are butting heads and they have different interests and ideas that might slow down your activities. So that's another challenge to keep in mind. And here, there are, of course, pitfalls to also avoid when setting up your living lab. Some of them are mentioned here, so there might not be enough time to, as a struggle, as a pitfall, not enough time to build trust. So your living lab is really the innovation intermediary that orchestrates this multi-stakeholder ecosystem. But of course, this is a role that requires some time, and stakeholders need to feel engaged and take ownership of the project. So definitely need to be dedicating some time to that process. When we look at starting from technology or data, the work of your living lab has to start from, again, the user's needs, so bottom up. And for this, a data collection process is, of course, absolutely essential. So, for example, interviewing users and organizing workshops to co-design the solutions might be good ways to address this pitfall. When we look at no definition of a governance model, I've mentioned this a couple of times already, but your living lab should provide decision-making opportunities to all stakeholders, involving from the beginning a representative from each of the stakeholder group to form your governance model and choosing the most appropriate legal forms. So, for example, whether you want to be a charity, a cooperative, or an association. So your model should really mirror a circle of mediators where there are no dominating voices. So everyone comes in equally and all the stakeholders are providers. Stakeholders' expectations. So understanding the barriers, but never making promises. We need to understand user expectations about your innovation. When we look at another common pitfall is the not having is a lack of focus. So addressing everyone and everybody. So we need to make sure when setting up a living lab that the living lab addresses specific user segments, so target groups that have to be well defined in order to properly address the user needs. So very much targeting your stakeholders. And the second to last, when we look at forgetting the role of the context, we've mentioned already, and as you've seen in the list of criteria, context is crucial. So where you are based, you need to define your context, and the service products that you are designing is part of the customer journey and the contextualization of it all. And finally, when another common pitfall is involving citizens at the end. So you will have heard me now that users need to be involved in citizens. Everyone from the quadruple helix needs to be involved at the onset. So citizens should be involved in the different phases of your innovation process. And in most cases, they don't need to be paid for their contributions, but rather the work should focus on motivation and keeping them informed on how their contributions are integrated in their project. So speaking again on how to keep them engaged, how to keep them incentivized. So being able to keeping them informed and providing that those updates are important. And ultimately, the work of the Living Lab is addressing a societal challenge that citizens would benefit from. So there's a great value in involving citizens at the very beginning in your Living Lab setup. And now that, so with all this being said about the challenges and pitfalls, the good news is that resources are available to you. So you do not have to reinvent the wheel when you're keeping in mind these pitfalls and challenges, or when you're trying to address them in real time. So here we have, of course, there are several Living Lab methodology handbooks that are available. We have co-creation toolkits that you can start from existing communities, build on project results, attending dedicated trainings, and learning from existing successful Living Labs, of course, doing some bit of mentorship or connecting with others. And here we will, of course, again, provide these slides to everyone, so you will have access to these links. But there are, again, many toolboxes that are available to help Living Lab managers, researchers, and stakeholders achieving their objectives. So here, some of them are referenced, and you will all have access to these links so that you can benefit from them in the future. Okay, and with that, that is the end of my section. So I will turn it over to Vladislava next to provide now some tangible real-life examples of the concepts and methodologies that we've just described in existing Living Labs. So I'll just stop sharing just one moment so that Vladislava can take over. So over to you, Vladislava.
Thank you very much. I will now share my screen. Oh, something happened. So I will share the presentation. Okay. We will move to the next slide. Just quick. So from BioSense Institute, we have Precision Agriculture for All, a Living Lab. So beside being a research institute with more than 100 researchers employed, as I already said, we have like educational system, economy, industry. We have natural environment, media, and governmental sector, all in our helical systems. So BioSense has experience in creating curriculum with the educational system, and for example, high school students, and we have that through our Syscode project. I will show you the slide here, and that means co-design for society for innovation and science. And socially speaking, this initiative provided aid in creating more professionals on the market, which constantly improves agricultural sector, therefore the society For instance, the introduction of ICT subjects in high schools specialized in agriculture. So younger generations increased awareness of the relationship between technology and agriculture. Now I will go to the slides here for precision agriculture in the industry. As you can see here, we have a project that is involved. So BioSense also additionally in the industry has both a living lab and a research institute, operates within a network of farmers, industry providers, startups within BioSense Accelerator Network program, and different partner researchers, institutions obtained through the regional and local projects. Since BioSense Institute is well renovated and positioned in Serbia, as an ecosystem of the actors, which includes big companies for food industries, SMEs, and other startups. We are direct contact with relevant stakeholders. We help them disseminate our work, like Research Institute on the commercial market. For instance, we have this project A Wish, piloting in EU project. That project is with the aim for digitalizing slaughterhouse in order to reduce the suffering of animals, increase animal welfare. Also our latest project, which includes co-creation and living lab methodologies in the project, is the digital village. I will show you this slide now. And together with the farmers, we create idea and disseminate our work in the agricultural sector. So we offer them technologies such as agricultural sensing and drone analysis and other technologies. Our greatest motivation to be beneficial for the natural environment and ensure sustainability, we invest a lot of resources researching in environmental and precision technologies such as drone and satellite. So also in our EU projects, we strive, in this our project Nashoons, that aims towards reaching out to preparation regional and national stakeholders to facilitate and implement soil health living labs. Also, I should mention that media-based and culture public, also like civil society, it's also involved, and the governmental sector. That was the slide before. I will show you right now real quick. So the initiative also brings us to the next point, the relationship with the governmental structure. Due to existing governmental strategies here, which are addressing to the policies that it's a little bit different for ICT in education in Serbia. We managed to influence the governmental sector to consider transition towards more digital education in agriculture. So in Serbia, and more traditional approaches of policy have been deployed. So I will move now to this slide. We also have our partners, Bodrum Living Lab. They are sharing with us their information. So I will now go through their slides a little bit. For BOL, actually Bodrum Living Lab is enabling a co-creating environment where innovative products and developed in real life environment. And as you can see here, design thinking and services, and the main goal is to apply and disseminate the living lab methodology via design thinking, public and scientific data, also behavioral science and green mission. I will now move to this slide. So this is how BOL actually included academia in I will just read now for shortly the Mugla City University for academic support, and also scientific analysis, marine sports academies, and also ENA for their International Archaeology Institute. So those are crucial stakeholders for the Bodrum Living Lab for academia. I will now move to the government and public sector in the BOL Living Lab. So the industry, just a second, I will just move really quick to here. Okay. So maybe I should first do the industry providers because they're the crucial within the Bodrum Living Lab. As you can see here, they're listed, and all these organizations are involved and in regattas, and they contribute their expertise, resources, and industry specific. So through the collaboration with the stakeholders, they're able to develop innovative and sustainable solutions to benefit both in industry and as well as the environment. So now I will move just quick here. So for the citizens, their NGOs are dedicated to agriculture, fisheries, environment, and tourism, and also from Bodrum, Egen and Gokova region. Their efforts have positive impact on the community, and they contribute overall development of the region. So I will now move to government and public sector. I'm sorry. The collaborations with stakeholders from the government and the public sector is essential to success for the Bodrum Living Lab. So here they're listed, some of them. I can just briefly go through it. So the ministries of the Turkish Republic, including the Ministry of Environment, Urbanism, Climate Change, Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, Ministry of Culture and Tourism, and they provide valuable expertise and policy guidance. The involvement of Mugla governance and governance solution and support, including Mugla Directory of Environment, Urbanism, and Climate Change in Mugla Provincial Directory of Agriculture and Forestry. So this strengthens and efforts for the management and sustainable agriculture. So local municipals, precisely Bodrum municipality, play a vital role in align our initiatives with the local development agenda, and they are engaging the community in sustainable practices. Now I will move to the other partner that was very pleased to share their information with us. That's Pomurje Agri-Food Data Lab, and you can see here. So this is the slide. So Digital Innovation Hub, DIH Agri-Food, so IT's Innovation Technology Cluster, Murska Sobota. It's focused on the cross-sectional innovation and smartification of rural sectors based on introduction of information communication technologies. Also Institute of Agriculture and Forestry, public agricultural advisory services, and research organizations. And they have more than 6,000 users and farmers. It is a member of the Chamber of Agriculture and Forestry of Slovenia, and also farmers, different size, production type, and structure, where pilot activities are implemented, like precision fertilization and spraying, remote sensing, tracking farm activities through the use of tracking systems. Now, this is, I will show you now this slide. So as you can see here, the platform of the data collection, analysis, and data space services for farmers and farm advisors and other parties. Data includes satellite and drone imagery, soil analysis data, fertilization plans, user fertilization, and they farm task recorders, data farm machinery tracking systems, farm accounting data, data from weather station, and so on and so on. So they have also precise fertilization and spraying services for farmers. Also FMIS, named for a farm manager, that is digitalized version and upgrade of the catalog of farm calculations, a tool that enables economic aspects and assessment of the product modeling and advising. Also, they have blockchain technology for tracking the food from farm to fork. Also, AgriFood platform, a free and open network platform where different stakeholders can reach for the organizations, project networks, products, and other services. So also AgriFood data space, federally organized and build modern data sharing platforms when data is shared among stakeholders from the agri-food sector on the basis of the pre-known policies and rules defined by the data management modules. And now we got to the chase for AgriFood Data Lab main stakeholders. For the industry providers, they put mainly SMEs providing technical solutions like satellite, navigation system services, tracking system, IT solutions, remote sensing, and so on. For government and public sector, they have Chamber of Agriculture and Forestry of Slovenia, Ministry for Agriculture, local municipalities. For citizens, mainly farmers, also food processors and consumers. And for the academia, last but not least, the University of Maribor, Faculty of Agriculture, and University of Ljubljana, biotechnical faculty researching the effects of different farm practices on the farm economy, environmental impact, soil, and so on and so on. So University of Maribor, Faculty of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science is a developing partner also in AgriFood data space. That will be it for
Thank you so much, Vladislava. That is great. And I believe I should now be back on my slides. Okay, thank you so much. No, and that was great. And I hope the examples that Vladislava provided help you better see how the different concepts and methodologies that I covered earlier can really be implemented and shown in real life settings and in existing living labs. So I hope you found this helpful. So for the next section here, just bear with me while I go here. So we wanted to briefly cover some of the Nashun support to applicants activities, since of course today's webinar is part of a series of activities that the Nashun's project offer to potential applicants to the Soil Mission open call topics on living labs. So with that, let me just scroll over here. So yes, so here I will show you some of the many engagements and capacity building activities that Nashun's continues to roll out to support you further in the application process. So in terms of the engagement events, we've just concluded the first round of national engagement events. So that means that all of you are actually now able to go and view the recordings for your specific countries, where you can find more information in your local and your national language, and including some presentations often from local experts. So we highly recommend you to go and watch these recordings. We also have, I'll speak to the matchmaking in a moment, but we also have fact sheets and e-learning materials now available online to inform and train you on the topics of living labs, the open calls, but also speaking of the different specificities of the living labs in the different land uses. So we have 5 fact sheets currently available on the website that we highly encourage you to go and see. And yes, I see some messages in the chat, so we'll be posting these links, no problem. so that you may access them. In addition to the fact sheets, we've also recently launched our online help desk and FAQ to support and answer your questions. So I highly recommend you checking this out. We also have, of course, this series of webinars. So again, today is only the first of a series. So more information very briefly so that we can show you what's to come next. We have a list of national coaches and mentors that can also be found on the website where you can access this list of available, of course, the mentors that are available in local language, and they have been appointed by the Nishuns project. And we have upcoming thematic webinars that will be hosted on different themes for specific land uses. These will be excellent opportunities for you to hear about the different challenges within the land uses or the different soil mission objectives in different contexts, and to make connections for future project applications. It will be a really good networking opportunity. And finally, yes, we have our matchmaking platform available to you to facilitate the creation of partnerships of Living Lab. So the matchmaking platform is available on the website nishuns.eu, which we encourage you, of course, highly recommend you to go and subscribe. And just to give you an idea, so as you're reviewing the platform, it is very important as you go to register to make your profile attractive to others so that you're filling in the different sections. So really speaking to which land uses you're focusing on, which soil mission objectives you're most interested in addressing. There's also a marketplace where you can search for opportunities, where you can connect with others. And of course, we encourage you to also propose your expertise on the marketplace so that you're able to, through your profile and the marketplace, sell your expertise in a way. So just offering your expertise to others so that there can be good exchanges of knowledge and connections made that way. And here you see that on the matchmaking platform, you can search for different stakeholders in various ways. You can search for companies, and depending on which type of organization as well, or the countries, for example, that you may be able to, you are able to filter in. You can search for specific participants from different types of organizations, or that may focus on the same land use than you are, or the same soil mission. And we have this, yes, the marketplace, which again, when it looks at different types of offering when it comes to expertise or project cooperation. So as you can see, lots of good opportunities are already available. We want to see this number grow. So please subscribe and share your opportunities as well on the matchmaking platform. Okay, and very briefly, in addition to all the Nishuns support the applicant activities I just mentioned, I just wanted to briefly mention a few more that are that will become available through the sister project Prep Soil, including a map of Living Labs and Lighthouses that is being continued and expanded under the Prep Soil project. So this beyond the network, the soil mission support project under Horizon 2020 started to map several soil health initiatives and have started mapping them regardless of their level of readiness towards the mission criteria of soil health. So these are initiatives or potential candidates to become soil health living labs and lighthouses. So you already have access to the information that's been gathered. And again, this map will be cleaned, revised, and continued and expanded under the Prep Soil project. So an excellent resource to access through the prepsoil.eu website, or the exact link here, which again will be in the slides that we'll be sharing with everybody after this. Through the Prep Soil, there's also going to be a couple project activities that will support Living Labs in speeding up their growth process. The first being the design of a wider spectrum of business plans needed for the upscaling of Living Labs and Lighthouses in different soil use types and socioeconomic conditions. So this is work that is underway. So highly recommend for you to keep an eye on the Prep Soil resources and website to here. The second will be the project or activity, will be the creation of a service package, again, to accelerate the adoption, maturity, and optimize the running of the missions, Living Labs and Lighthouses. So these will be, again, excellent products for you to better grow your living lab and be successful in your activities. So again, keep an eye on PrepSoil, the PrepSoil website, and subscribe to their newsletter as well to receive updates on these activities, or feel free to get in touch with us directly and we will help answer any questions. And with that, I will now turn it to my colleague, Giulia Campodonico, who will be covering some of the questions that, of course, thank you again to everyone who have submitted their questions already through the registration form. We were glad to see that many of them were going to be addressed through today's presentation. So I hope that already some of your questions have been addressed, but we know some of them are coming up. We are already still receiving some in the Q&A box. Still an opportunity for you to submit them, but I will now turn it over to Giulia to walk us through these questions. Thank you so much, Giulia.
Thank you very much to both Isabel and Vladislava for the clear presentation that I hope you enjoyed. So thank you for also submitting your questions. These are really useful and have been used also to shape a bit the presentation of today. What we realize is that the questions are mainly related to the Living Lab, so to the general concept. Most of these aspects have been already addressed in the presentation, but we will go through the questions. And the stakeholders and sites that the Living Lab should address, but also the partnerships for applying to the funding opportunities and some general soil aspects. So looking more into details at your questions in the next slide. Yes, so what defines a living lab and what guidance we can get for application? Well, for the definition of a living lab, you saw what we meant with, and Isabel already went through that with the different steps, and the importance is to aim for a structured constellation of different organizations in line with the public-private partnership people partnership that we described before. And the guidance, as Isabel presented, there is a lot of resources available on the Nation's website, but also do not hesitate to get in touch with the national mentors that have been appointed, so you can liaise with them in your local language and probably ease the process for application. Then how to set up a living lab at regional level? Well, this is, we have been through the steps and so no need to go through that again. For the challenges, well, the challenges at regional level is really to identify a common goal, a vision that enables you to provide an added value to all the stakeholders and sites that you need to engage in your living lab. There is also many challenges in setting up a living lab per se regarding the level we aim for, but there's, as in the toolkits that Isabel presented before, there are many tips and tricks, and we will also go through that in the next webinars more in details. In terms of the size recommended for the living labs, there is no limitations nor minimum requirement. Of course, you need to demonstrate that your living lab is not working on one side or two sides, but is really working on different sides that can also grow over time to enable you to demonstrate that the solutions you develop are valid and meaningful for different scenarios and different users and different contexts. In terms of the governance structure, this is exactly the topic of the next webinar, so we highly recommend you to join us next week as well. And for the legal steps in establishing a living lab, no, there are no legal steps. There are recommended steps, and what we see as ENoLL is that there are many actors calling themselves living lab, but not really working as at the macro level, as Isabel presented before, while there are other not describing themselves as Living Lab who are actually really performing the Living Lab approach. There's also the certification that ENoLLs offer, which is guaranteeing the macro level and entire methodology, but this is not necessary for the mission. So the ENoLL certification is not linked to the creation of a soil health living lab under the mission. The main platform of communication for Living Labs, well, this is really, it depends on the different stakeholders, on the specificity of your context. What you need to develop is really an understanding of the actors you need to work with and to talk to be able to be meaningful. In some cases, it could be social media, and in some others, it could be actual meetings. So it really, you need to be aware and adapt your communication strategy also to the specificity of your case. So how can I join the European Living Lab network? That is a bit wider. So if you're talking of ENoLL, the European Network of Living Lab, this is everything. All our members undergo a certification process, and we will be happy to join you, to reach out to you. So contact us and provide more information, but this is separate from the mission, as I said before. In parallel, the becoming a member, a soil health living lab, this is through the funding opportunities we will have, and you will have a huge support structure that we're setting up, and will start in January 2024 to support you being part of this network of 100 soil health living labs and lighthouses. And for the scale up, this is also a question and the scale up of a living lab that we will address in the next webinar next week. Talking to stakeholders and science, can a living lab on agricultural soil health or carbon farming be created without citizens? This is again really depending on your context. What is important is that you take into consideration the quadruple helix, all the different stakeholders that we mentioned before, and really understand who can provide feedback or co-create with you and give inputs to your results. This could be only farmers, but sometimes also citizens can contribute, being affected by the results of your solutions. And it's right that you take into consideration the whole value chain. So there is no recipe, but this needs to be considered accurately. The best methods for engaging the stakeholders, well, the toolkits that Isabel presented now is showing a lot of co-creation tools. And this is really a best way to start and provide inputs on how to engage the stakeholders. But again, as I said before, you need to know the specificity of your context, of your ecosystem, to understand what works better. And it's really a test and try and until you find a good recipe. There is no fixed recipe for that. Talking about the hectares or percentage of the farm might should be necessary for showcasing the practices and becoming a lighthouse. There is no indications on this. What is important is the performance, as Isabel presented before. So this is the focus, and the sole criteria is excellent performance. So this is, again, there is no recipe. It needs to be an excellent performing solution that can be replicated and demonstrated and reused in other contexts. Looking at the next questions on the partnership. So how can a site be proposed so they can be integrated in the Living Lab, and where can I find other partners or other Living Labs? This is exactly the matchmaking platform we have created at the moment. That is available. What I recommend is not only to upload your profile, but really offer an opportunity, which is either I'm creating a project, I'm looking for partners, or I bring my expertise in this context, in this region, and I would be happy to join. So this is really the best solution, but it requires an active participation on the platform. So do not go beyond the mere profile setting. Just be sure, sell yourself on the matchmaking. This is a marketplace for cooperation. So be sure that you sell yourself on the matchmaking platform properly. For what comes to the soil questions, I will now be happy to leave the floor to our colleagues Lynn and Uliana from Aarhus University, who are coordinating the Nations project.
Thank you, Julia. I'll cover maybe the first question, how to address the soil challenges and the needs of a region when creating a living lab. I think basically when you design or you create a living lab, and that was also mentioned in Isabel's presentation, this part about engaging your multiple stakeholders is really, really important. And that means looking for stakeholders that represent your land use. So land users, advisors, citizens, and researchers, and then engage them in this co-creation process of letting them define what are the most pertinent challenges in relation to the soil mission objectives, of course. And that can be done in different ways. One way is to have focus groups or interviews or workshops, so as to let your participants highlight these different perspectives that they have, because they are the ones that are working with these challenges every day. And of course, you can also draw on more secondary resources from previous research, such as publications or data and so on. And maybe I can give an example from prep soil that we are coordinating. And here we have the prep soil partners that have carried out an extensive work. They have been doing workshops and focus groups in 21 example regions across Europe that represent different soil needs according to 4 types of land use. So representing agricultural soils, urban soils, forestry, and mixed use soils. And in these workshops or focus groups, these multiple stakeholders have discussed challenges, practices, sustainable practices, the availability of data, lack of data, and what they have specifically used is an approach called a DIPSIA approach, where first participants focus very much on identifying and then talking about drivers, pressures, states, impacts, and response. So that's one way of using a specific methodological work for addressing soil challenges and also for finding solutions to them in such workshops. And the outcomes of these 21 workshops will be presented in a report in October. But until then, you can also read a number of blog articles from a selection of these 21 regions. So I'll be happy to paste the link to these in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the second question for Uliana.
Thank you. I'm the project manager of Nations, and we are responsible for the scientific questions related to agroecology at your Aarhus University. So that's why I'm the one answering this question. And the question is there any protocols developed for monitoring and measuring relative change in soil carbon content or soil organic matter? And actually, there seems not to be a consensus across Europe among the scientific communities on how to do these analyses at the moment. But EJP Soil, which is a joint program on agricultural soil management, funding research projects and innovation projects, they have just met last week, and where they discussed also with these projects the state of the art of the soil climate research. And this includes the monitoring of the changes in soil carbon content. So the presentations are not online yet, but they will soon be available on their website. And I'll also post this. It's agpsoil.eu. And there is also a quite interesting presentation given by the European Commission, the DG Climate, on they are developing a certification system on carbon removals, and they are engaging an expert group that are discussing these days actually. And this expert group will provide the tools for the monitoring, reporting, and verification of carbon removals. So that could be for inspiration, but right now we can't direct you to protocols for this. We have to pave the way while we are running us in the soil mission projects. I'll also post a link to this working group, information about this working group. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliana and Line, for joining us and yes, agreeing to answer some of these questions, which I hope you all found useful. So seeing that our webinar was to run until 11:30, we only have a few more minutes left. So what I'm going to propose is that I will maybe conclude the webinar in a way by just presenting the last few slides in terms of next steps and action items that we have for you. But then we offer to make ourselves available for a little bit longer and stay on the line to answer many of your questions. We've been receiving them on the through the Q&A box. So thank you very much. We're keeping them, and we can address some of them today live with you, and then we can perhaps take some of them offline, and as part of our next the resources that we plan to share with you, we can perhaps look at the remaining questions and address them in this way, since I'm not sure how much time we'll have to cover 30-some questions. So, but it's great to see that you know, we're keeping the conversation going, and you have many questions, and we commit to provide you with the answers to those. So let me just cover the last few here. So yes, in conclusion for today, I did want to briefly remind you of the two open call topics on Living Labs for the open call research, innovation, and other actions to support the implementation of Mission A Soil Deal for Europe, which includes the topic 08 on co-creating solutions for soil health in Living Labs, and topic 9 on carbon farming. So very briefly, a reminder that the deadline for submission of applications within this work program for both topics is September 20th, 2020, so this year, 2023, at 5 p.m. Brussels time, and the submission is of the type single stage, meaning that the full proposal must be submitted at once by the deadline via the portal. And that's both topics are research and innovation actions, meaning that any actors are covered by 100% funding. So very briefly, excuse me, I'm losing my voice again. And again, just briefly a reminder that your projects must include, application must include 4 to 5 or more living labs for each application in at least 3 different member states and or associated countries. Wonderful. So in terms of very much finally for a call to action for you, connect with each others. And for this, we have, of course, a matchmaking platform that we've presented earlier. We have the thematic events also that will be coming up very soon. So keep an eye on our website, subscribe to our newsletter to get the latest. You can reach out to us via the help desk and ask any questions. So if your question was not represented today, or you didn't get a chance to submit through the Q&A box, there will still be an opportunity, as always, to submit your questions. We're here to help you and support you. So please do make good use of the help desk for this. And then very briefly, the next webinar will be next Thursday, so a week from now on the 29th, and we'll cover the governance and business models for setting up a living lab. So we hope to see you there. If you haven't registered yet, please do. And that is it for the formal presentations. I will just say a big thank you to everyone who attended today's session. Thank you to Vladislava who presented. Thank you, Julia, Juliana, and Line for your provision of answers to the questions. And yeah, so a big thank you. We'll close the official program here, and we'll stay on the line perhaps for a short while to answer any more questions. So thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you at the next one.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Also, thanks to the Linda who's helping managing this very broad community. We received many questions, so I don't know if everyone is, I see that everyone is leaving, but we can still try to address these questions so you can see them in the recording. Otherwise, as Isabel mentioned, please ensure to address them also in the help desk. One of the first question was about the possibility of creating hybrid types living labs, meaning that they have test sites for other types as well. In general terms, in ENoLL, we see many cross-cutting living labs ranging from different thematics, and this is pretty normal. So the only thing is that within the mission soil, what is important is to work towards soil health. So this could be done by a living lab that operates across different types of land uses, or it can be the living lab can focus on the same type of land uses. The important is to find a common goal and to all work together towards soil health and the mission specific objectives that Isabel presented. Then there are a couple of questions about including open calls to encourage the additional farmers, or whether farmers and users should be engaged as partners in the project. Not really. You really need to ensure that you have the partners engaged to run the living lab and to run the activities. And that's why also the Commission envisioned in the opportunity, in the call, the opportunity to provide financial support to third parties, so that you can still have some budget either through open calls or other methods to engage further actors that do not make sense as a whole as partners. Then there's question about the survivability and ways to take some partners as enablers to provide local living labs after the project duration. And this is exactly what we will be addressing next week in the governance model and sustainability. Then there is a question about saying that functional living lab is a very complex to set up. I agree, and the question asks also about the construction phases, whether these are possible during the project. There is no readiness level per se mentioned in the calls. What is important, you need to grow your living lab. Every living lab continue to grow. So this is also, it's not expected that from the moment of application, the living lab is set up and ready to work. What is important is also to remark that all the living labs will receive support through a dedicated and mission-funded support structure that will help the living labs to grow further. What is important is that you have in mind all the different steps and you take into account all the different resources to benefit of these training services, and also to that you have all the actors that will help you to go through these processes and steps. Then there's another question about the contacting ENoLL, and here again we would be happy to get in touch with you to explain better ENoLL, but this is not the scope, and ENoLL certification and support services, but this is beyond the scope. Then there is a question about an agricultural living lab to be also a lighthouse. As Isabel presented before, the living labs include multiple sites, and one or more of these sites can become a lighthouse. The living lab per se is the orchestrator of all these different sites and actors they bring together. Then there are many questions on the roles of stakeholders, the difference between the different actors, and this is exactly what we will address in the next training on governance, so be sure to register to that. And then there is questions on funding opportunities, but please be aware that the application process and funding opportunities will also be addressed by webinar number 3. So we will not repeat that. And this includes answers to expected duration of the project, financial support to farmers, And I saw a question on how to engage with Nashuns during the project. What we recommend is mainly to take into consideration, as written in the call for proposals, all the different structures you will be engaged with. So this is for sure. The first is the soil support structure for Living Labs that will also record and monitor all the Living Labs quite regularly, so time needs to be set aside. But also it's important to take into consideration that the mission implementation platform will coordinate all the different projects with different activities. So it's important to set aside a dedicated task, as mentioned in the proposal, but also enough time and resources to travel, to engage with, and to really be part of the community, which I know will be a huge task when you're busy setting up and further developing your Living Labs and implementing the research. But this knowledge exchange is really at the core of being part of a network of 100 soil health Living Labs. And I'm trying to see if there's additional questions. Will there be a second call after September? Well, consider that the calls at the moment are only for the work program 2023. We don't know yet when and how the calls for 2024 and future years will be published. There's indicative timeline on the number and waves of Living Labs expected under the mission that you can see in the mission implementation plan, but no timelines yet, as the work programs are so far published on an annual basis. When and how will payments to Living Lab be made? Well, this is usually in line, being in line with the Horizon Europe funding system. So usually projects and all the participants receive a pre-financing before the beginning of the project upon the signature of the grant agreement with the European Commission, and then additional resources will be allocated over the reporting period, but this again will need to be discussed bilaterally with the Commission once you are selected and in the grant agreement preparation phase. And I don't see additional questions. I see in the questions, though, a lot of you offering their expertise and email. So we really recommend you to register to the matchmaking platform and to offer your expertise. As maybe, Isabel, you can show again the slides on the different options that participants have. So as I said before, do not limit yourself to upload your profile, because we have more than 400 profiles, so this may be hard to be identified. What is important is that you also upload an opportunity, which is either an offer of your expertise or a research for partners. Sorry for Isabel for making you jump from one side to the other, but I think that is really important. And also do not hesitate to ask questions on the help desk. We try to respond in less than a week. So we're doing our best, so do not hesitate to write us any question you may have, and to look at the FAQs, because many of the questions we also have been addressing them in the FAQs. I don't see. No, I think we addressed most of the questions. We will go through the question and answer again, and we'll try to provide feedback anyway to those. So I leave the floor to you again, Isabel, to close.
Thank you so much. Great. Yes, so I hope we answered most, if not all, your questions. But as I mentioned before, the help desk remains open 24/7. So feel free to reach out and we'll get your questions that way as well, or to email Nashuns regarding other types of topics that you may need assistance with, but highly recommend and encourage you to use the help desk, as it is the best source to get in touch with us and get quick answers to your questions. So with that, again, then I will thank again everyone, 169 who stayed on the line. That's great to hear the remaining questions and answers. So thank you all for sharing your time with us. Again, a big thank you to everyone involved in the planning and delivery of this webinar. And we look forward to seeing you next week. So thank you all. We'll be back in touch with the materials as soon as possible. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.